I've been burning through Jaime Hernandez's Locas stories from Love and Rockets recently, and it really feels like one of those pieces of work that is almost comics affirming, right? The approach to it is just wonderful, with a very specific style and decision making throughout all the 700 pages of the strips that I've read so far. But for this episode, I just want to take a single page and discuss what makes Jaime's style so human, and how he balances this very grounded approach with moments of extreme heightened cartooning, without ever losing the reality of the world and his characters. You're watching Strip Pile Naked, I'm Hass, and I'm going to show you some of the cool stuff lurking in the pages of some of the best comics. Love and Rockets is a series by the Hernandez brothers that has been running for decades and spans literally thousands of pages. Jaime Hernandez's work within that has primarily been the Locas stories, centering around two characters, Maggie and Hopi, and these kind of like slice of life, slightly surreal, slightly magical stories. I was trying to find a way to encapsulate a lot of what I love about Jaime's style across the hundreds and hundreds of pages of strips that I've read, and I found this page from 1995's Bob Richardson story, which I think encapsulates basically 99% of what I love about his work in this one single page. So I want to use that as the examination for this episode. So this page is a 9-panel grid, but honestly, before you think this is another 9-panel grid episode from Strip Pile Naked, I don't think there's much to Jaime's use of grids in Love and Rockets, beyond the general sense of sort of density in the page. He seems to find the most effective way to fit as many images and moments on the page as possible, and we'll come back to that, while still leaving enough room in the panels to do his work. In this instance, the grid works as a series of kind of almost like 3-panel strips, right? The Master Wrestler in the background mostly emotes in 3-panel forms, but beyond that, the grid is probably the least interesting part of this page, for a reason. What this is all about is the humanity, right? When everything needs to come back to that. For me, this is where Jaime's style finds the ultimate balance. And if we think back to our Scott McCloud theory, right, he talks about the levels of detail and our level of understanding. So for example, you could draw a standard face as a circle with 2 dots and a line, and we'll understand what that means, right? But you can also draw an extremely detailed, extremely tightly rendered face, and we'll also understand that to be a face. Both convey the same kind of core idea, but to varying degrees of nuance. And with that, the more you define, the less you leave to the reader. Those 2 dots and a line can be, a man, woman, non-binary, they can be black, they can be white, they could be a child, adult, whatever, right? At some point, a reader decides, which is why things like emojis are so universal. What Jaime does in his work is bring that level up to just enough that we start to see the characters, but open enough that we still have to fill a few details in about them. And this is really, like a sweet spot of cartooning that artists find their own balance in. If you look at work by like Adrian Tomine, Daniel Klaus, Rainer Telgemeier, all of those have their own level of this to a standard, right? But arguably they all operate in a similar fashion to Hernandez. Characteristics are filled in, but the character is still left open. This really is where comic books shine, I think. For Maggie here, for example, when we look at her, we see who she is. We get a sense of her physicality, we get a sense of what she looks like, and yet I'm sure out of all of you watching this episode, we've all got different actors that we think will be most suitable to play her. She's not, ultimate Nick Fury being specifically drawn as Samuel L. Jackson, for example. She's defined, but she's open. And in doing that, Jaime allows us to both understand her, but also to hold her as our own version of her, right? We can create her, which creates a genuine connection to the character and all the other characters in Love and Rockets, because we're making them in our own heads. Like, we're taking this drawing and we're filling in the rest ourselves. A lot of comics manage that. I've mentioned a couple of other cartoonists that work in a similar fashion, and honestly, most comics work in this way. But Jaime takes it a step further, because his acting for the characters is wonderfully large and exaggerated, which truly brings them to life on the page. Let's see the middle tier of this page as a good example, right? In the foreground, Maggie is talking, and we see 3 moments of acting. Each one takes the comic's approach of exaggerating to the extreme of the moment, like this big relaxed smile, her lean forward, hand on chest, the sweat drops flinging in the air, and the way she leans back, arms folded, sigh marks floating. Each of these is the extreme, just really large acting, in your face, impossible to get away from. The nuance isn't there on purpose, because the heightened acting creates characters that feel alive with a movement in a medium that lacks it. And I've said this before, but comics to me is much like theatre, right? Going big is often very helpful. And when you combine this idea with what we just talked about, how, as readers, we're really bringing these characters to full, rounded ones ourselves, this large acting works in the same way. What's also worth noting is how Jaime uses the same style in his exaggerations as he does in the toned-down acting. It's not cartoon but realistic style suddenly going to a densely rendered image for exaggeration like you might find in manga, for example. It's the same regardless of what level the acting is on. It all feels kind of as one, as uniform, which stops those sort of exaggerated heightened moments from feeling too out of place, which is a very specific choice being made. And coming back to the grid, it doesn't work as effectively without the density of the imagery. These 9 panels exist so that Jaime can get 9 moments, technically more than that because of the depth in the foreground and the background and the 2 characters we're seeing, but we can get 9, to 18 moments of acting in one page. 9 moments to get a character to emote, to react, to exclaim, to laugh, etc. The density is important for density of emotion. No comic book page has a specific length of time in the same way that like a reel of film might do, so Jaime condenses as much as he can to basically put as much life as he can into each page. And on that grid he creates an invisible structure. In a similar vein to other times we've discussed the grid like David Lapperman's Stray Bullets, the grid is there more to create a repeating unified structure that draws no attention to itself really. And in doing so, the page layout disappears behind the characters and their acting. Jaime uses that repetitive structure of the grid to put the character in the foreground for the reader, to make them the priority, not the panel shapes or bombastic layout choices or anything else like that. It's character, and that's a vital part of his style and integral to the stories that he tells. The focus is always on moments within the panel borders. And that comes from eye level framing too, right? The characters are almost always on our level, again adding to the humanity and our connection to them on the page. We are stood in the scene with them, witnessing it happen, very much in their circle of friends. And one thing this page has that it's not necessarily a particularly defined quality in Jaime's work, but does come up in moments like this, is that repeated function. Panels stay the same so we can see the change in the acting, so that once again, very much like the grid staying invisible and kind of sinking into the background of the page, the framing choice essentially is doing the same thing here. By putting emphasis on how the characters are changing panel by panel, he's putting that at the front of the page, so that's the main thing that we engage in. And that's how Jaime gets us to care about the plot, because we care about the people involved in these strips. And it's all of these factors that are working together rather than independently that gives Jaime's style just so much life. Every decision made on the page seems to be heading towards the same common goal, which is to bring life to the characters and make them feel human and real, even in these really exaggerated situations. And there are some really exaggerated situations in Jaime's work. So doing all this really shows a creator who's able to get a genuine emotional reaction from their work. And if you're looking to do the same, or to learn how someone can do that in comics, Jaime Hernandez's Locas stories are the perfect place to start. Thanks for watching. If you're a fan of Strip Pile Naked, you can support the channel via the Patreon, where for your pledge and your support every month you'll get access to literally years and years and years of exclusive writing, annotations, and reading lists. You should also grab yourself a subscription to Panel by Panel magazine, which is the Eisner-winning magazine that I edit. Otherwise, hit subscribe and the little notification bell to keep up to date with all the latest episodes, and I'll see you next time.